Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. The national budget for 2018-2019 has been tabled in the House of Assembly by the country's Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest, who has touted it to be a landmark budget put forth by a government which is committed to curtailing excessive governmental spending. Value-added tax has been increased to 12%. Gaming houses will have an increase in taxation, and Deloitte & Touche has been commissioned by this FNM government to explore a different taxation system. As of August 1st, value-added tax will be removed from breadbasket items, and most importantly, the national deficit has been brought down from $650 million in 2017 to $310 million in 2018. Tonight we discuss Budget 2018, examining our national treasure with the proposer of the national budget, the Honourable Peter Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
Is your loved one celebrating a birthday? Or maybe they're commemorating a special occasion and you don't know what to get them? Why not get them something custom made from Executive Printers? At Executive Printers, you can create personalized calendars, greeting cards, and even playing cards just for them. A one-of-a-kind gift. They can even do personalized cups, mugs, keychains, coasters, and notepads. So come in and place an order today. We are located on Jerome Avenue South, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Are you coughing, sneezing, having headaches, respiratory issues, allergies, or itchy skin? Toxic mold may be the problem. Clear Solutions Plus can help. Certified best in the Bahamas, specializing in mold removal, water damage restoration, AC duct cleaning, and more. Call Clear Solutions Plus to schedule an inspection for your home or office at 677-3138 or 427-3138. Open 7 days at the Mount Royal Plaza. Clear Solutions Plus certified mold removal. Visit our website. We are your solution to indoor air pollution.
Mr. Speaker, today we traveled from the Cabinet Office to this honorable chamber with a red briefcase. And in 3 years, we intend to change the color of that briefcase to black. Indicating that we have moved from deficit spending to our plan for surplus. We understand, Mr. Speaker, that to achieve this requires discipline and sacrifice. And I will speak to that as we go through. Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to present the 2018-19 budget communication. Mr. Speaker, this is a landmark budget. Indeed, it is arguably the most transformative budget in the history of our nation.
Yes.
It is a budget about finally putting an end to past practices of fiscal mismanagement and instead adopting an approach to the management of the fiscal affairs of the nation in the manner that they should be managed, that is, in a responsible, transparent, and accountable way.
Welcome to On the Record. The national budget was tabled in the House of Assembly yesterday, and it is now the discussion of the nation. Customs exemption for travelers has moved from $300 to $500 twice a year. and our urban residents will see lots of concessions. Tonight we discuss Budget 2018, examining our national treasure with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Minister, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jerome.
Good to have you back. Last time you were here, you were a candidate.
Absolutely.
A lot has happened in that time. So I told you this morning when I walked in the studio, you know, next time you're about to raise some things, you got to let me know before you come in. But I have to dive straight into, I think, well, not think, but I'm sure the most contentious part of this budget, and that is the raising of the value-added tax to 12%. People, I sort of watched from afar on social media, and it is all people have been talking about. Minister, people want to know why. That's the first question. It just seems a very difficult pill to swallow at this point.
Sure, and I understand fully the concern of the Bahamian people. Certainly no government wants to come into office and raise taxes. We understand that there are thousands of Bahamians out there who are paying their bills on time, struggling to make ends meet, and any additional tax represents a significant event for them and their ability to be able to maintain their standards of living. And so as a government, we think very carefully about these things. The reality, however, is that we have a national debt that is approaching $8 billion. Last year, you would be aware that we borrowed somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 to $1.4 billion. That covered bills that we knew about up to the time that we presented the budget of about $400 million. It included refinancing of existing loans and $323 million to cover recurrent expenditure. Everybody would recognize that almost from the time of independence, we have had a series of deficit budgets presented. And those loans that we borrow every year have added up and accumulated to this $8 million monster that we're faced with today. The reality is that the interest cost to finance those or to manage those loans has grown to $381 million a year. So of our revenue that we earn,
$381 million just in interest.
Just in interest.
That's not the payback yet.
Of the revenue that the government earns, $381 million goes to interest alone. Obviously, we cannot continue on that path. We have to find a way to bring that debt down and to reduce our borrowing. And so, faced with a number of challenges as to how we do that without causing undue hardship on the economy and on consumers or citizens, we have to consider how do we
Minister,
balance
12%
this
increase
number.
in VAT that is a burden. People are already struggling to deal with the existing VAT at 7.5.
Sure. So again, you know, we didn't come into this just willy-nilly and say that, you know, let's find 12% and, you know, whoever can pay it and who can't. The reality is we looked through all of the options that we had in terms of both raising revenue as well as cutting expenditure. All right? Now, when you talk about cutting expenditure, there is a thought that we can reduce the size of government to reduce the cost of providing the services.
Let people go, send people home.
Exactly.
So that's an option.
And that is very easy to say. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is we have a fragile recovery. We grew 1.4% last year. And if we were, and you hear it from the opposition already, as we have rationalized just the short-term contracts that were given out in the last election period. How do we justify, how do we say to Bahamian people that we're going to send people home to bring our costs down without the economy being able to pick them up?
And you say send people home, send more people home.
Send more people home.
So some people have already been
exactly.
going home.
We've done the cuts that we think we could do that were reasonable and rational, right? And now you're talking about starting to cut into the meat. In other words, those persons who depend upon their jobs from the government, who have been long-term employees of the government, who provide services to the government. So if we were to go too far in bringing the public service down, that will cause consequences in the economy. We looked at programs that the government offers, and try to rationalize some of them to see how we can bring them down. And we've done some of that. We've looked at the state-owned enterprises and tried to see how we can bring the subsidy that we give to them down. And we've done some of that. We recognize that we have a lot more work to do in terms of modernizing the systems of government. We have embarked upon a technological digital upgrade modernization program that we think is going to help us to do just that. But as we make these adjustments, we have to do them in a gradual way so that we do not dislocate people and push them into poverty, and that we do not shock the system such that the services that people require are not provided. So that takes us back to the revenue side. We looked at all of the options that we have with respect to generating revenue. And you will see in the budget where we have increased fees on various things that have not been increased for many, many years.
Like the police records?
Like police records and these kind of things.
Was it 20?
Police records are going from $3 to $5.
Five. Sorry.
Fingerprints, I believe, goes to $20.
20, okay.
Okay. And we looked at these fees to see how we can bring them up to reflect modern cost, right? And we've done that. I think we raised about $90 million in that process. We looked at customs to see what we can do in customs. We looked at real property tax to see what we can do in real property tax. And we recognize that in both those two areas, we have some opportunities through better compliance, better administration of those tax types. And we're working on that. We're projecting somewhere, I think it's $100 million in that.
But all of this still is not enough.
Exactly. All right, because remember now, we have been borrowing somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 million, $500 to $600 million every year.
Wow. Really, Minister, this is the result of successive governments.
Absolutely.
This is what we are now experiencing is, I guess, in some ways, fiscal mismanagement over decades.
Well, I think what it is politics has had a lot to do with why we are where we are.
Really?
The fact of the matter is that the public is very demanding. Persons want the job, they want a contract, politicians feel the pressure, and they meet the request. And only the way to pay for it is to borrow or to tax. Right? Governments have been reluctant to tax, and so they've been borrowing. Right? But as I said, this is now getting to a critical point where we are unable to sustain the debt load that we have, and certainly cannot sustain any further increases.
So two things I want to discuss. One, second part of my question would certainly be what would happen if we didn't do this. But, you talk about, I found it very interesting, you said, you don't want to push people further into poverty. But for the average person, we have seen the cost of living, we've seen prices increase exponentially since VAT came into being. And, it's disheartening sometimes because I think some merchants and people who are in business just automatically have tacked on these exorbitant increases to cover VAT, and they seem to, well, since we're going up, let's go up. And the cost of living has increased. We feel it, we see it. It is a real burden. I mean, when I take $20 on the bank, it tells me in the ATM 7.5%. I say, but just buy $20. I'm taking out of the bank. But we have felt it in every sector of our lives, in every possible way. We have felt the increase of value-added tax. And, you say you don't want to push people further into poverty, but that is a real concern that people have. How am I going to deal with this increase now in taxation? And coming, to a people who we have not ever really been taxed at this level. You've paid your national insurance and a few other things, but taxation for us is a new phenomenon. Yeah.
Well, the truth of the matter is it's really not. We have been taxed before, but we've been taxed indirectly at the border through customs duties.
And Minister, we find some very creative ways to bring our goods in.
Exactly, yeah. and we're trying to address that, not only in terms of enforcement and compliance, but also we have given incentive for people to be honest. As you know, in this budget, we've increased the exemptions for personal goods.
So instead of getting the $300, and you now get $500, which people seem to be.
And so that will hopefully make people a little bit more honest, right? Hopefully. We've also incentivized local retailers by making shoes and clothes, for instance, duty-free. We are going to be very vigilant about the pricing of those goods to ensure that that savings is passed through to the consumer.
So shoes, and I read this morning, shoes and clothes coming in duty-free.
Duty-free.
Okay.
Right?
So we should see a reduction in these items.
So we should see that reduction reflected in the price in the store. You are right. There have been some less than ethical business people who have taken advantage of the situation.
Many of them, Minister, okay? Many of them.
And that's why we want to put in place protection measures through the Consumer Protection Commission as well as through the Ministry of Finance to ensure that these savings are passed on to the consumer. The reality is that when you look at the most vulnerable in our community, we are in some ways trying to protect them through the exemptions that we give to breadbasket, through the exemptions that we're giving through clothing, through the exemption that we're giving for electricity and water and medicine, the catastrophic health care that we hope to introduce. So we are doing the best we can to protect the most vulnerable. Now, you know, the fact of the matter is we all live in this Bahamas together. There's only one Bahamas. And so somebody's got to bear the cost, right, of providing these services. And with the system that we had before, the poor was paying a disproportionate percentage of their income for these basic services.
Are there a lot of people whose electricity bills are less than $100?
33,000 persons.
Really?
33,000 homeowners.
Less than $100?
Less than $100.
Wow.
Yeah. 33,000 people.
That's a shocker. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't read.
Absolutely.
Did not realize
33,000 households. Right?
Households. Okay.
For water, 43,000 households. People that will benefit directly in their pocket from that
before we go to the
incentive.
break, if let's take a different scenario. We continued along the same lines. You did something different. You did not implement this 12% value-added tax on items. What could happen? I mean, what would be the scenario if you took another route? You're saying that basically you looked at everything and said, hey, we're out of options. This is the only thing we can do.
Yeah.
If you did not go this route.
So the reality is we'd have to borrow another $500 to $600 million this year. And you know, again, ratings agencies look at our overall economic circumstance, look at the government's management of finances, and they make an assessment. We're already at what they call junk status, below investment grade in our credit ratings. As they evaluate our situation with respect to the increase in debt to GDP, the increased cost of financing that debt, they make assessments. And so we very well could be at risk of further downgrade. What does that mean? It means then that $600 or $700 million that we would have to go to borrow today would cost us even more in higher interest rates in order to be able to obtain it. That means that there is less money for the basic services that the public demands. So and not only that, we have to look at our currency to ensure that we protect the stability of our currency.
So that could be at risk?
Fortunately, right now, we have reserves of about I think it's $1.6 billion, don't quote me on it, but I think it's $1.6 billion in reserves at the moment. But all you need is one blip, and that could be eviscerated. You can have a hurricane, you can have an oil spike that makes a drain on the reserves, and it can be gone in no time. So we have to protect our currency level, we have to protect our credit rating, we have to protect our ability to respond to natural disasters and other external shocks that are unanticipated.
Well, we are discussing the 2018 budget, examining our national treasure with the Honourable Peter Turnquest, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. We'll be back right after this break.
When being cool isn't an option, the only option is Dane's Air Conditioning Refrigeration. For over 30 years, we have specialized on improving the air quality of homes and businesses in the Bahamas. As an expert in all brands, makes, and models, we have fully trained staff that will work to provide you, the customer, with the best possible cooling and refrigeration option. Although times may change, we are always on the forefront of technology, specializing in installations, repairs, maintenance, duct cleaning, and all energy-saving air conditioning devices. Let us earn your trust and help you reduce your next light bill. Dane's Air Conditioning Refrigeration.
Welcome back to On the Record. If your electricity bill is under $100 a month or your water bill is under $50, you will not be charged value-added tax. This will impact some 70,000 residents in the Bahamas. We just heard those statistics as we were discussing the budget 2018, examining our national treasure with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Minister, one of the things that is of concern, you collect, people charge all of this VAT. All this money is taken in. Is the government keeping up with collecting these monies from merchants? Because it is my understanding there are some folks out there who are carrying on some unscrupulous practices. You're charging us this 12% increase now that's going to be passed along to the consumer. So we're paying on everything. Are you know, this is designed now to bring in additional revenue. What are you putting in place to ensure that you will collect this revenue from these people who are eligible to pay VAT?
Sure. So VAT is one of the most self-policing tax systems that there is in the world.
And that's scary when you talk to about payments. I have to be honest.
It
sometimes we aren't the most honest people.
Absolutely. But it does mean in order for a business to receive credit for the VAT that they have paid, they have to also report the sales that they make. So it kind of polices. But we are aware that there are some unscrupulous businesses and people out there who are purporting to be VAT registrants, charging people's VAT, but never remitting it to the government. We have a very strong audit department who monitors these and does data analytics on these businesses to determine and try to identify where these things may be occurring. Obviously, in a system like ours, it is possible that some people may get away.
Particularly the smaller businesses.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But, you know, again, VAT only applies to those businesses that have a turnover over $100,000. So the small man below $100,000 shouldn't be charging VAT at all. And I would say to the consumers out there that if a business is charging you value-added tax, you should look for the certificate that proves that they are in fact a VAT registrant. Because if they don't have that certificate, then they ought not to be charged. They should have it displayed. Absolutely, the law demands that that certificate be displayed.
One of the things that you have done is removed VAT from a number of breadbasket items. This was a campaign promise of the FNM and something that voters and supporters have been calling for from day one. Mm-hmm. But you have a long list of items on which VAT has been removed or is to be removed. How are consumers going to feel that? How am I going to see and feel that difference when I go to the counter?
Well, again, the retailers will be required to first post on the shelves the price of the goods. Mm-hmm. When you go to the register, you ought to be able to determine that VAT has not been applied to these particular items that are included in this bread basket. And the bread basket, by the way, we are still looking at refining. I know that there's been some concern about the composition, that it isn't healthy enough. As you would know, the Minister of Health has been conducting a series of consultations with the public about the bread basket and what the ministry feels is a more healthy bread basket. And once that is done, we will make some adjustments.
So we may see that list increase?
Exactly. We might see it increase and we may see some items removed from it. Mm-hmm. All right? Because we want to make sure that not only do we provide a cost-efficient bread basket, but we also want to encourage healthy lifestyles, because that has an effect on the back end in terms of our health costs.
You've removed VAT from things like insurance, medicine. are these designed, what is thinking behind removing VAT from those?
So with respect to medicine, we recognize that the cost of healthcare is very expensive. I have residents who complain consistently about the cost of some medicine. We want to remove that burden. We don't believe that you ought to be penalized because you're sick. And again, that is another reason why we're looking at the catastrophic element of national health insurance, because being sick ought not to be a consequence of being broke. And so we want to provide a benefit for residents who would ordinarily not be able to afford care or will have to have the cookouts and all the rest of it.
So this is just medicine, but not on the service?
Not on the service.
So we're still paying VAT to see the doctor?
That's correct. But for the most vulnerable, again, who is really who we are looking after in this particular circumstance, they have access to care through the public health system, for which they don't pay. So we still believe that Bahamians will have access to quality care through that system, and now they will have a benefit in not having to pay value-added tax on those medicines.
There is also a provision there that deals with this, the tax-free zones that the government wants to create. Tell me how that is fitting into this overall budget picture.
So again, what we recognize is that there is inequality in our economic system, that those who are at the poor end of the scale tend to pay more in taxes. They have less opportunity. It is reflected in our schools, it's reflected in our communities. And so the whole idea about this over-the-hill initiative that the Prime Minister has put forth is to create renewed, livable communities that will instill pride and self-esteem in its residents, that will give them opportunities for economic advancement, that will play out in the social aspect of our communities, in that people who are generally content with their living circumstance, with the cost and the ability to provide for their children, to educate them in a safe and progressive environment, that they will be less inclined to engage in destructive activities. So the Prime Minister has designated this area to benefit from this first phase of concessions, concessions for rehabilitation of dilapidated buildings, concessions for new construction, concessions for small business people in these areas, concessions with respect to duty on vehicles that are required to execute work, not for pleasure, but work vehicles. We want to bring down the cost of doing business in these communities. And the only thing we ask from these businesses is that they partner with us in a social contract, that they contribute to the community.
Minister, one of the justifications for the increase, and I keep going back to this 12%, because that is really, I think, the most contentious thing that you said at the beginning of the show, is you want to be able to reduce debt and to really pay off all this money that we've been borrowing. But is it that now that you put in place this increase in value-added tax, will we see a drastic reduction in government borrowing?
Yes, absolutely. This year we're borrowing, I think it's 187 million. That's down from 322 million last year. It was actually 722 million last year, covering prior bills and this year's commitments. So we're down to $187 million. Next year,
what's that 187 million going to be used for?
That is the shortfall. Even after we increase value-added tax to 12%, we still are faced with a shortfall of 187 million.
And then what's going to happen in the following years? Because I know your aim is to get to a balanced budget, correct?
That is correct. Mm-hmm. So the following year, that number will drop down, I think it's to 100 million. And then third year, we're actually projecting a $10 million surplus. At that point, we will start to be able to make a real dent in the debt, bringing it down, as well as to give back to the Bahamian people.
That's my next question. So when are we going to then now see the relief on this? Because we're about to pay.
Yes.
And we're about to pay big.
Yes.
So when can we look for some relief? Because now, these are taxes heaped on the backs of Bahamian people, you know, and let's be honest, the FNM campaign and coming in, we campaign on the promise of reducing some of the burden of taxation,
yes.
but a year in, value-added taxes
yes.
increase. So people are, I mean, I'm coming to that,
yeah.
but when are we going to see some relief in all of these taxes and really begin to reap some benefits now? So
when you look at the budget that was presented yesterday, there is immediate relief for a whole segment of our community. Immediate relief. People are focusing on the 12%, but if you look at all of the incentives that have been put into this budget, you'll recognize that it will affect directly, favorably in the pockets of many, many Bahamians.
You've reduced a lot of custom duties
Absolutely.
as well, right?
And provided some incentives for others that will hopefully spur economic growth as well as job creation.
But
to answer your question directly with respect to when will the Bahamian people start to see relief, I will draw this illustration. If you go out and spend on your credit card and recognizing that you do not have the money in the bank to pay it, you recognize that you are committing yourself to a reduced disposable income for however long it takes for you to be able to pay it off. Well, that's the phase we are in with the government. We, as a government, have gone out and spent on that credit card. Now we have to pay those bills. And so we have to save a little more or allocate a little bit more of our income towards paying down that credit card. Now, once we pay down the credit card, we have increased revenue. We have more disposable income. So now we can invest in other things, or we can save. So in year 3, we project that we're going to have a surplus of $10 million, and that is after giving back to the Bahamian people through further customs reductions and further incentives, about $100 million.
I was looking, going through your speech, and I read it somewhere, I was trying to pull it up, and it's not a direct quote, but you said something to the fact that we as a government, meaning the FNM, was not looking, we're not going to do things that are politically popular. We're looking to do things that are in the interest of the Bahamian people. Are you concerned, though, sir, at this point that your approval rating has probably dipped, well, I'm sure yesterday, to an all-time low? And what will be, politically, what's going to be your future?
Yeah, you know, if we operated on the fear that we are going to be unelected in 2022, we will do the same things and make the same mistakes that previous administrations have done. That is unacceptable.
But that's very bold in politics.
It may be, but you know, one thing
I would
say about the cabinet that I have the privilege of being a part of is that we are focused on making the situation, the circumstance of the Bahamas better, irregardless of what that means to us personally. We are committed to leaving a better Bahamas than we met it. The fact of the matter is, if we don't make some corrections in the course that we have been going, we're going to leave a Bahamas that is inherently and significantly less better off than we inherited when we were children. It's unfair to leave our children with an $8 billion and growing debt without any way or any plan to correct it. Listen, we have a vision for this country, particularly with respect to the financial, from my perspective, for the finances of this country. I want to leave my children and their children a safe and secure financial environment where they can express themselves and they can achieve without having to worry about paying off bills that I created or my parents created. The fact of the matter is that we have to take control of our circumstance. And as long as you're in the hands of the debtor, you do not control your circumstance. And it's the same thing that I say with respect to the financial services industry. We have to take control of our circumstance, because if we keep waiting for others to give us the rules or to tell us what to do, we're always going to be behind the 8-ball chasing and unsatisfied. One
thing I want to talk about before we go to the break, you said in your speech all ministries and departments were mandated, this is in the last fiscal period, to implement a 10% reduction in respect of discretionary expenditure. we project, as a result, government wage bill and purchase of goods and services this fiscal year, meaning this year that's just finished, are projected to be down, are projected to be down by $120 million or 10.3% from the amounts budgeted. Yeah. So you're looking for government departments and ministry to reduce spending by 10%?
No, I think what that is saying is that over the last year, this fiscal year just closed,
right.
As a result of the direct interventions that we made, we have brought that wage bill down by $120 million.
And that includes sending some folks home?
That it does include right-sizing some agencies. It includes rationalizing some of the contracts that were issued that were unfair to both the individuals who were involved as well as the public service itself.
So you saved the country $120 million?
Yes.
How do you plan to reduce that further?
Well, again, we know that there's still a lot of excess in the system. But we are not proposing to arbitrarily or capriciously reduce that number. What we want to do is to look at all of our agencies and ministries and the state-owned enterprises to rationalize the levels of the wage bill and to bring them in line with industry norms and benchmarks across other countries who are similar circumstance and size as us. But that can only be done in a growing economy, which we are fortunate to have at the moment. Because as we bring down the cost in the public service, we need to see the same level of increase in the private sector. And so we are giving incentives to the private sector to accept some of this challenge and to absorb some of this capacity.
We're going to take a break, but when I come back, I want us to talk about what you're doing. You would have just mentioned there in the private sector, what are you doing to, particularly in the entrepreneurial sector, to begin to spur some growth or continued growth in that sector? Stay with us. We're discussing Budget 2018, examining our national treasure with the Honourable Peter Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. We are mid-show. We've got a lot more. Stay with us. We're back on the record right after this. We are in our second season of On the Record, and we thank you, our viewing audience, for allowing us into your homes every Thursday at 8 p.m. We value your opinion, and we want you to be a part of our discussions. So make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram and comment on our exciting topics. Remember, it's all on the record. Welcome back to the second half of tonight's show. The government is proposing a revenue enhancement recast to make sure the country's revenue is collected properly. The national budget was tabled in the House of Assembly by the Honourable Peter Turnquest, the Minister of Finance, who is our guest tonight as we discuss the topic, Budget 2018, examining our national treasure. Sir, a part of your presentation yesterday, you said, we commissioned Deloitte & Touche to undertake a detailed assessment of the appropriateness of and options of alternative forms of business tax in the Bahamas, the revenues from which could, as an option, serve to replace the fees now collected in respect of business licenses. As a small business owner, that piqued my interest immediately.
So what we recognize is that, again, as I said earlier, our current system of taxation is inherently unfair. The poor pays a higher percentage of their income as opposed to the more well-off. The same thing is somewhat true in the private sector with businesses. In other words, businesses with large turnover and low margin are paying the same rate of tax on that turnover as businesses with low turnover and high margins. And so as a percentage of their income, these businesses with low margins are paying a higher percentage of tax. In a lot of instances, it's actually driving those businesses into cash flow problems. And so we have commissioned a study with Deloitte to look at our overall tax system, to evaluate the effectiveness of those systems, the effect that they may be having on these entrepreneurs, and to see if we can rationalize and maybe come up with a more progressive system that is fair, that does not tax businesses into bankruptcy, and give them an opportunity to survive and to progress. In addition to that, though, we are also looking at how do we support the entrepreneurial sector overall. We talked about the direct incentives that are included in this budget. And one of the things I think is very progressive for New Providence, because we do it in Grand Bahama, is the idea of creating bonded warehouses or bonded spaces for importers to bring in their goods conditionally duty-free, so they don't have to pay that duty up front. And as they sell their product, they pay the duty that is due. So
it's almost a storage facility, and as you sell out, you
exactly.
pay out.
So we've started with the car dealers, where they can import their vehicles, put them in an impound lot, and as they sell them, they pay the duty that is.
You've also reduced. I mean, one of the items you've reduced the customs duty on is
vehicles.
New
Absolutely.
Cars.
Again, which we hope will stimulate that sector, as well as allow Bahamians to actually purchase a new car versus the growing influx of used Japanese cars,
which are creating other issues.
Causing other problems.
Even the hybrids, I see you've reduced.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Prime Minister has been very adamant about pushing the green initiative from before we came to government. And this is just another one of those initiatives that we're doing to push that.
I have to ask you, and this is for some of my friends in the gaming industry, they got hit very hard. You all have implemented or putting in place even more taxes on the gaming industry.
Yeah.
Even the people who play.
Yeah. So some would argue that this is where the tax ought to be in the first instance. The minister responsible did a study where he determined that throughout the region and the world, our tax on gaming was the lowest. And so we have sought to rectify that, as well as we need to increase the revenue from that sector. We recognize that this sector has been lucrative. We recognize that there is some inequity that has crept in or has been allowed in that industry, and we're trying to level the playing field a little bit so that the sector gives back as much as it takes.
But in that taxation or an increased taxation, you're not concerned that this could have a negative impact on that industry? And I'm not looking from just the playing side, but the amount of people that are employed in the industry, et cetera. It is an industry, and quite a few people depend on it for livelihood. So, I mean, if it has a serious effect.
Based upon the analysis that was done, we don't think so. Now, the minister himself will speak more to this because he's obviously more intimately involved and aware of all of the details of the studies that have been
We just
done.
want to put the minister on notice that we come in to get him to come on this show too. When you go back to cabinet, you can tell him I sent the invitation.
Right. But you know, again, based upon what we know, we believe that there's room without causing any hardship or very little hardship to this industry.
I'm sure they'll have a much different take on this.
Nobody wants to be taxed.
Yeah, well, that's the reality.
Yeah.
In your presentation, you also spoke to the expansion of the micro and small and medium-sized enterprise, or MSMEs, in the Bahamas. And it's something you went into depth in terms of what you want to do to attempt to spur those in that industry, and because in any economy, it's that group that really is the engine. It's the micro, the small, the medium-sized businesses, and they have been crying out for a long time.
Indeed.
That they need, you know, just in trying to do business is so prohibitive.
Sure.
The level of taxation, which you spoke to, you know, that you'll be looking into, but, you know, needing incentives and to be incentivized, you know, when you look at, you have these huge you know, foreign investors who come in who receive all these concessions. But you trying to open a little lemonade stand on the corner,
absolutely,
and you getting beat.
Yes. So in this regard, we have a number of initiatives. As was indicated in the budget, we are allocating money to BTVI to provide scholarships for training in skills. That is a direct attempt to, as I said earlier, reduce the dependence on government for employment and create entrepreneurs. Right? To support them as they go through these training programs and develop skills, we are creating a small business development center, which will help them to create business plans. It will help them to identify and flesh out their ideas, and to help them identify financing that can possibly be used to capitalize.
I see here $25 million over 5 years
so
that you'll be putting into.
Exactly. So we're going to put $5 million a year into this program. And that is to help to get these persons that we're going to be training into business.
Now that's just training, or will that be capital that they can access?
The training cost is I think it's about $2 million or thereabouts. That is just for training. All right. We expect that those persons, when they come out, they will have some skills. They need money. They're either going to be employable, or they're going to have the skill to be entrepreneurs. Those who have the skill to be entrepreneurs and wish to get into business, we want to assist them in making that happen. And so we're providing capital that will be made available to them to get their tools, to get their shop, to get whatever it is, and to get into business. We want to provide them with support after to ensure that they have the best opportunity to be successful. And so there'll be mentoring programs, there'll be support with accounting and legal and all the rest of it that they need in order to be successful.
And Minister, make sure you have the right people in place to vigilate over these programs.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to get to that, because the other aspect of it is that we want to ensure that the program is free of political interference as much as possible.
Thank you.
That's in the mandate.
Not as much as possible, free of political interference.
Agreed. But that's in the mandate and in the pillars that we have set up for this Small Business Development Center. We have a very talented executive director already hired, and she'll be filling out her team. I guess I just gave her, she's a feature, but she is going to do a fantastic job for us. And I believe that the contribution that she and her team will bring will result in direct empowerment of Bahamians.
We're looking forward, and a lot of young people out there who are crying out for it. So because the traditional workforce is changing.
Absolutely.
And has changed significantly.
I'll tell you, one of the stories that I feel very strongly about, and why I'm so excited about this program, is a young lady who has developed a natural medicine or supplement for diabetes. And she needs money to get the equipment in order to put this in pill form so that she can sell it.
Fantastic. We'll be definitely looking out for it.
Non-traditional.
Now, I want to talk something. This caught my attention immediately. Something called the blue economy.
Yes.
Which enables an identification and diversification into many other new emerging ocean-based activities and sectors. Marine aquaculture, seabedding mining, maritime safety, surveillance, marine biotechnology, marine security, offshore wind energy, ocean renewable energy, and deep sea oil and gas production. Let's leave the deep sea oil and gas production for last. But talk about this blue economy and what. When I saw it immediately, I thought, what is a blue economy? Yes. And then obviously, as I started to read more, but what is that intended to do, and how are you hoping that will affect, or what will that do?
So we know that there are many untapped resources that we have in our oceans that surround the Bahamas. We are a country that's primarily made up of water, and we have not taken advantage of all that has to offer. For instance, just the other day we had a conversation about a microorganism that is, I believe, is attached to coral that is used in medicines. Very valuable. People don't know about it. There is the aragonite discussion. There was an attempt at a study that was done in the previous administration that was not completed and was not conclusive, nor did it draw out the business to determine whether we are maximizing it, whether it is sustainable, whether it is something that we ought to exploit.
Are we putting money behind all of this?
We are putting money behind
And about
this.
how much are we looking at putting behind?
I can't remember the exact number right now.
But we are putting serious
Absolutely.
money and resources behind, and not just sitting to talk about it.
No, absolutely. You know, again, we are in government of action. We're not, all of the things that we have put forth, we are putting our resources behind it because we believe that there's credible opportunities there for Bahamians to earn an income and to increase our GDP.
Minister, we are just shy of one more segment. We're going to take a quick break. We have a couple more areas in the budget to get to, and then, of course, you know, I cannot let you sit in if we don't have a few questions for Grand Bahama. My friends in Grand Bahama will kill me. Stay with us. We're going to be back with more On the Record right after this.
Every time I'm in the Bahamas, I use Rev Go Play.
And cut.
Here come that fool. It's packing. Here he comes.
Yo.
Wait, Omar coming?
Boy, this Rev Go Play, solid.
Rev, you and us together.
Welcome back. This is our final segment of this episode. Our topic tonight is Budget 2018, examining our national treasure. My guest is the Honourable Peter Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister responsible for Finance. One of the things I thought to be I picked out to be very interesting in your presentation, you spoke about the somewhat lackluster performance in tourism, alluding to the fact that the large properties in New Providence and Paradise Island saw an average occupancy rate decline of 10% to 60.70%. But total hotel revenue was largely unchanged based on the increase in room inventory.
Right.
Recently, we would have heard the Minister of Tourism speak to the outlook for tourism and what was about to happen. But I think definitely in your presentation you alluded to the fact that Bahamar was responsible in part to some of that. But the outlook for that industry seemed to be a little bit more positive. And I want to talk about what you expect, or what has caused that, or what has caused that optimism. So
the year to date, the increase in tourism has been somewhere in the order of 17 to 18%. That is a very significant, favorable uptick in the tourism
arrivals. Do you attribute most of that to Bahamar?
A lot of that has to do with Bahamar. A lot of it has to do with the fact that some of our neighbors to the south, their room inventory had been damaged, and so people are looking for alternatives, and they've selected the Bahamas. Of course, we want to make sure that now that they've chosen the Bahamas, that they come back. But a large part of it has to do with Bahamar. They now opened all of the hotels on that property, and they're doing a fantastic job. I think they're even ahead of their own projections at this point. And we hope, and indications are that this will be sustained over the year. So we're looking for good returns from Bahamar. Atlantis continues to do well. And fortunately has not suffered any degradation in its capacity and arrivals. So the tourism industry in Nassau is doing well.
I've seen the Minister of Tourism come out and say that his position has changed on Bahamar. So the Prime Minister and his comments, even in there, you would have seen even giving credit to Sarkis Ismailian for his role. Do you regret some of the then opposition comments about what was happening at Bahamar at the time? Do you regret what would have been said and some of the positions that were taken?
No, I don't think so. I think the reality is we have to look at how we got to where we got to. And there's a lot to be said on both sides of that argument as to how much the Ismailians may have contributed to the situation, and how much the government may have attributed to it, how much the financiers may have contributed to it. So it is not a matter of regretting. And I think at the end of the day, the then opposition's position was that we ought to be facilitating the completion of this project, and we ought to not be in the position of choosing winners and losers in terms of the settlement of the impasse that had occurred. At the end of the day, it seems to be working out well, and we're pleased. That's all we wanted in the first instance, was to ensure that we get a completed project that is up to the standard that had been approved and envisioned, and that it has the best opportunity to be successful.
We have some other projects that are in the pipeline, some investments to win, I think you would have just broken ground on recently. How do you anticipate that affecting the economy and even your projections?
So WIN, I think, is going to hire about 600 people during this construction phase, and I'm not sure the numbers going on, but their hotel product is going to be different than the Bahama project, which is its closest competitor, and the Breezes. It's going to be more of a condo hotel style property, which is a desirable product because it actually encourages repeat visitors. And so we believe that that's going to be a sustainable project that is going to contribute to GDP and to the tourism product that we have here in Nassau.
The Department of, this is again from your presentation, the Department of Statistics reports that between November 2016 and November 2017, total employment increased by 11,344 to a total of over 200,000. We'll get into the exact number. That growth in employment surpassed 4.1% expansion in the labor force during this period, the latter affecting both the entry of new graduates into the labor market and a 2,000 decrease in the number of discouraged workers. As a result, the national rate of unemployment in November of last year stood at 10.1%, fully 1.5% lower than the rate a year earlier.
Again, we would have to say that Bahama would have had a lot to do with that. They're almost up to their desired level now. I think it's 5,000 employees. If you look around the Family Islands, there are ongoing projects that are spooling up and are providing employment. So generally speaking, we expect that this trend will continue over the next year. As other projects come on stream, as the Albany continues its build out, Bahama gets fully up with all its entities and amenities, as persons take advantage to get involved in entrepreneurial activities and start to hire people. We expect that this trend will continue.
Are you able to say, or able to track, or give us any sort of insight into those workers who would have been displaced from the public service, those who are on contract, etc.? What has happened to those workers? And that's a substantial amount.
Well, you know, the good news is that the private sector has absorbed most of that capacity. And we're very pleased about that. Because whenever you talk about displacing 3,000 people, or whatever the number is, and I don't think it's 3,000, but whatever the number is, that is a concern, because that has a knock-on effect, or the potential for a knock-on effect. But we recognize that, again, we have a period of growth, and that the private sector has the ability to absorb some of this capacity, and they have done so. And we are very grateful for that, and we continue to support that. Again, our objective is to create further opportunities for job creation and for entrepreneurial opportunities, such that we can continue to right-size and turn this cone upside down, because right now the government is the significant largest employer in the country. That shouldn't happen. The private sector ought to be the largest employers in a country and an economy, and the government facilitating that growth. Because again, the larger the public service is, the more taxes you need to support it.
So included in this increase in VAT and all of this, this increase in taxation will be the people of Grand Bahama, constituency you represent, an area that has been in economic decline now for decades and can't seem to catch a break. What is on the horizon for the people of Grand Bahama?
So Grand Bahama is very near and dear to me, obviously, and many of my friends and supporters are there, and front and center is, what does this 12% mean to them? We've built in as much as the safeguards and the safety net as we can. Social services spending, for instance, is being increased by $3 million, actually $4 million, to try and provide some relief. But most importantly, we recognize that we need to get the economy up and going. We've been working very, very hard to try and get the Arlequaya project off the ground and restarted. It is a complicated deal. It involves 4 parties, and whenever you have more than 2 parties to a deal, it's difficult. 3 and 4 parties is just a very, very
Can you see a finish line? Can you see the finish line?
We do see a finish line. We believe that we're almost there. We've agreed on most of the most difficult points, and now it's just a matter of putting that down on paper. What's the time frame?
You think a month?
I hate to put a time frame on it because I did that before, and I don't want to give false hope.
Okay.
But we believe that we are very close to a very exciting project, and we're looking forward to bringing that to conclusion.
Now, I have to ask you, what's happening with the Oban deal?
Before I get to the Oban deal, just to continue on that tourism project for a minute, even more eminent, we believe, is the West End project. And that's somewhere in the neighborhood of over $2 billion of projected investment to bring that project back alive and to build it out to even better than it was projected when it was first envisioned. That is going to provide significant economic boom to the west of Grand Bahama, in addition to the other things that the government is doing itself.
Well, that's good news to hear that it'll be some hope outside of Freeport itself. That's important. Absolutely. So now let's talk on the other end, on the east. Right. Oban.
So Oban. We've appointed a committee of cabinet which is supported by some experts in the oil refining business. And as you know, Grand Bahama has been in the oil refining business before. And so we're tapping into that resource. We're tapping into other experts from the environmental side, other experts from the legal side, to have a look at what has been done, to look at the way that the deal had been structured, and to come back to us with some recommendations for tweaking of that agreement as they see.
It's still going to go ahead?
At this point, we have no reason to believe it's not. We are obviously going to be guided by this committee and their recommendations and the ability of the developer to be able to meet and agree to those conditions. But we certainly are working forward in good faith to give it an honest opportunity to be successful, and we'll see how it
Minister, I'm going to give you the final 30 seconds. A lot of people are very anxious about what would have been presented to the House of Assembly yesterday, particularly when you talk about that 12% increase in value-added tax. People just saw their lives or their income diminished. They see, all they see on the horizon is paying more for the essential things that they need every day. You're talking about 12%, even a 15%. You're talking about 12%, 15% gratuity on top of that. So I saw many posts yesterday, people saying, "Oh, I got to cook at home now. I can't afford to eat out." What do you say to the Bahamian people right now, tonight, as they watch the show, very anxious about what is about to happen with this new budget?
So I want to say to the Bahamian people that, you know, we recognize that whenever you talk about increasing taxation, that it is an uncomfortable topic, and it is one that certainly no government wants to engage in. However, the fact of the matter is that our fiscal circumstances is such that we have inherited a significant deficit as well as significant debt. And we have to get the situation under control. Otherwise, we're going to face much worse consequences going forward. We see what has happened with some of our regional partners. You can look at Barbados, you can look at Jamaica, and see what happened when they reacted to their fiscal circumstances too late. You had outsiders come in to dictate how you're going to manage your affairs internally, whether it's laying off people or whether it's increasing taxes or whether it's cutting services. We want to get ahead of that problem to ensure that we do not take the country to the brink before we recognize that we are living on excess and we need to bring back our finances into line. We recognize that there's significant risk to allowing that to happen. And so we are trying to bring balance to cutting services, cutting the cost of government, while at the same time ensuring that the most vulnerable amongst us are able to live and to maintain a decent standard of living. It is unfair, and I agree that it is unfair to those of us who pay our taxes on time, that pay our fair share, that do not live lives of excess beyond our means. It is unfair. However, we all live in one Bahamas, and we all have to share in the benefits and the cost of having the services and the kind of quality of life that we enjoy. And so, yes, we recognize that we're asking for more sacrifice from the Bahamian people. But we are putting in place the incentives and the benefits that we hope will offset some of that cost and that will deliver success for us in the long term, where we are able to change and to turn our fiscal outlook around, to bring our government back into line with the comparable states, and we're able to invest further with and live within our means and provide a better quality of life for future generations.
Minister, thank you so very much for coming on tonight and speaking with us. I hope that this discussion tonight has given people some insight into the budget. We could have talked for another hour, but certainly you've got a great task ahead of you, and we wish you all the best. And certainly we'll be watching to see how these new measures and new fiscal policies are played out and whether they are as effective as you hope they would be. But of course, again, we thank you for coming on tonight. We appreciate you being here. We hope that you, our audience, have enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to our guest, the Honourable Peter Turnquest, my producer, technical staff, and of course you, our audience, for watching. Please sure and join us for more On the Record next week. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.